with the lighting, it goes dark and then Jaws disappears, right? How the heck does that work? Because we see in a previous scene, he is slow. He is a big lumbering dude. He can't just
whatever.
Like,
he's Michael Myers.
Disappearing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like that scene plays off like a horror movie, essentially.
Yeah.
Like it's a horror death. It's a horror scene. You know, it's not necessarily a heroic chase fight scene like you would see in a movie of that time. But it's more about like Jaws is this menacing, hulking character, and he goes after the guy who has the plans or the microfilm or whatever, and he kills the dude.
This is the tomb of Cheops.
He's definitely menacing and scary, but I find him to be a little silly. Like, he's super strong. Why does he bother biting people? He could just snap their neck.
It's a fetish. Gets off on it.
The one moment where it makes sense is where he bites off the chain on the bars. The one moment where it doesn't really make sense is when Bond throws a piece of wood at him on the train fight, and then he just takes the piece of wood and like bites it.
He's just like,
he doesn't use it to stab him or anything. He just bites the wood.
I'm fine with that so far as it's intimidating.
Yeah.
There's a certain level of intimidation that Jaws projects. My whole thing isn't that him biting people, I think, is great. I think his goofiness comes in the form of my one goof for the movie. And the movie has some goofy stuff, you know, like the car falling into the house.
Yeah.
You know, like there's some goofy stuff, but I don't care. I mean, like McCurdy, you were arguing that The Man with Golden Gun has a lot of goofy stuff. And I'm like, whatever. Like, because now we live in Popcorn Zone. We live in Popcornville with the movies.
Scott made a good point. But Scott did make a good point, though, that this movie feels a lot more balanced as far as the goofy and the serious. It's a much more balanced movie.
Sure. But there's still goofy in there. There's still fantastical stuff. And like for you, what it comes down to is like the car plane doesn't work. This car boat works. Like car sub works. Like that's fine. Like we'll just like.
So what's your one goof?
We disagree on like the car plane for different reasons, but like there's still Roger Moore goofiness throughout this movie, and I'm fine with that for the same reasons I'm fine with it in The Man with the Golden Gun. But the worst fucking sequence in this whole movie is the moment that Bond gets into the phone booth repair car truck with Jaws, and then XXX gets in too. They're at the club. They meet up with Calba, the owner of the club. Calba gets up to go to the phone. Turns out that it was a ruse by Jaws so he could get the microfilm. He kills Calba. He runs out into his, where he's sitting in his car like this. And Bond follows him and he gets in. And then XXX follows Bond and she gets in. And,
they're not whispering.
And then at the same time, for some reason, there's a speaker that goes from the back up to the front so that Jaws can listen into their conversation, which they're not even whispering. They're like, "Hey, we're in a car," and Jaws, "Hey, we know about Jaws, right? Do you know about Jaws?" "Yeah, we know about Jaws." And so then Jaws drives them out into the middle of nowhere, and Jaws' whole plan is not to just go in the back and just fucking murder them, which he could easily do, even though they have guns. Like, they never use a gun on Jaws. He could just go in the back and just fucking kill them. But instead, Jaws drives out into the middle of nowhere and then runs them around some Egyptian ruins and then tries to drop a rock on Bond's head and then attacks Bond. And then right away is bested by XXX with a gun. Whatever. Then past that, she gets the microfilm from Jaws. She runs back to the car. Bond has the keys, which is cool. I mean, that like Bond is smart. He grabs the keys before they go chase Jaws. But then we have our first comical scene that completely undermines the fucking terror that is Jaws, where Jaws comes out of nowhere, lands on the hood. He rips off the roof. He then doesn't grab them. They don't even have guns. Like, wouldn't it have been great if once he ripped off the roof, she immediately shot him in the chest, like just in the shoulder, and he's like, and he falls off.
That would make
But then
sense.
he gets back up because he's Michael Myers. He's a badass motherfucker, and he starts ripping up the car. But instead, it just completely undermines Jaws. It just makes him look like a fucking clown. He was terrifying up until then. But then suddenly it's like he doesn't have a dick. It was almost as if he wanted them to steal the microfilm. If that was the case, like, let them get away with the Death Star plans so we can track them. Great, but no, it just completely undermined Jaws.
Yeah.
And here's my fix. I would so much rather have Bond go look for Calba, who's been murdered in the phone booth, and then boom, we just have a fight scene within the club between Bond and Jaws, and then Triple X joins in on the fight because at that point in the movie, she's like, I guess Bond is an ally as much as we're competitors. I'll help him get the microfilm so that then, later she can blow smoke in Bond's face and steal it from him. But like, would it not have worked better to have Calba get killed? They have a fight within the club, just like they do on the train. I mean, you could still have the train scene, but like they battle it out in the club and they defeat Jaws together and run off. Rather than this ridiculous scene that ends in Jaws tearing apart the truck for no reason, like he's just showing off, and then they drive out and they have the ridiculous music and then they have to walk. Like, that whole sequence fucking sucks.
Yeah. I hated it. I mean, what you said makes sense. All those suggestions make sense, but I guess I didn't take it that far. I was just looking at the scene itself and thinking, there's no tension here. There should be, because we're supposed to think Jaws is like super scary, threatening guy.
Yeah.
Their music choice, and then I guess Bond is so confident he's just deciding to be a smartass in the scene and not scared of Jaws.
Would you like me to try it? Women drivers.
Bond's sitting there cracking jokes, and then cut to him on the train as he's like, holy f***. Like, that could just as easily have happened. Like, Jaws only had to reach in and grab both of them by the throat and pick them both up. Like, Argh! I mean, again, had she, I almost wish he hadn't kicked her gun away or that she had picked it up, because as soon as he rips off the roof, he just jumps off the car. Like, had she shot him, that would have been cool. You know, like, like literally just shoot him in the fucking chest. And he's like, but it's like he's such a badass that hardly phases him. But instead, we have this stupid scene that just sticks out. It sticks out from the rest of the movie. And it should have just been fucking cut out like cancer.
So just so you're aware, the music choice specifically after this scene when they have to go back because they fucked the van up so badly is from Lawrence of Arabia. So that whole bit where he's walking and you hear the swell of music, that is the same theme. That is exact same theme from Lawrence of Arabia. So they wanted to play off that scene. I mean, it wasn't as much as what I thought it was as like some of these other movies is playing off things that were popular at the time, because Lawrence of Arabia came out maybe 10 years before this movie came out.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just a fun callback to being like, oh yeah, remember that movie Lawrence of Arabia? Like this, like, because Indiana Jones isn't a thing at this time. So like that's the reference.
It just goes to show though that whole sequence is a joke. And like I've said, Bond doesn't always need to be serious, but like, wouldn't you prefer Jaws to maintain his credibility as a bad guy rather than at that point it's like I'm sorry, but in the next movie Jaws is completely undermined. But like, wouldn't it have been better had he been a terrifying tour de force the whole film rather than this moment where you're like, this guy shouldn't be taken seriously? I mean, without that scene, he would have maintained some credibility. Which, okay, speaking of music though.
But hold on. I will also say I'm reviewing the playback here, and then you do have some moments where, you know, like they run into Jaws and they're like, okay, we pinned this guy down, but then he like lifts the car up, and then they're able to like get past it. And then if you want to talk about undermining moments though, the worst part is when he like lifts the stone and it hits his foot.
So, well, that's what I mean. That whole sequence is just a big joke against Jaws.
If to go to Charlie's team and give you a point on this one, I would say that I think this is the epitome of when you write a movie around set pieces, because obviously it's very clear to me that they were like, well, we got to film in Egypt because Egypt's a really cool exotic location.
Exactly.
And then they would be like,
Exactly.
okay, well, let's have a fight scene besides this pyramid scene that's in the dark with this light. That might not work with the audience. So we
How
need
about
to
he
have a fight
drives out
scene.
into some Egyptian
And some of the
ruins and we
Egyptian ruins, and we
walk
have a
around
fight
like
scene
a
out here.
tour. Yeah,
And it's
you're
light,
like,
and people actually can see all this stuff. And
Yeah.
and so they would put this scene in the movie, and they
Yeah.
were like, yeah, it's still great, even if it's goofy. And yeah, it's not as. But the thing is, like, this movie's like evenly goofy, where I'm like, nothing to me sticks out ridiculous enough. There,
that
like,
whole sequence though, like that
there's
whole
no slide
sequence,
whistle in this
like
fucking movie. Is what I'm
most
saying.
of the goofiness is in
Borderline.
that sequence, and then beyond that, it's like fun goofy, like Jaws flying off the highway and landing in that Italian guy's house.
Mhm.
That's fun. Like I'm not gonna.
No,
That is
no,
goofy,
but
but
I
that's
still-
fun goofy. You know the whole thing of the muscle comes back pretending to be a waiter later on.
Yeah.
Jaws could never do that. Like he's like 17 feet tall, and